Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hey everyone, this week we're diving into the energizing world of electric vehicle technology. 2025 is shaping up to be a game changer for battery tech, with innovations like solid state and sodium ion batteries promising longer ranges, faster charging, and more sustainable materials. We'll explore how these advances are moving from the lab to the road, enabling electric vehicles to travel further and charge quicker than ever before. But it's not just about the technology. We'll also discuss whether our power grids and supply chains can keep up, and what new players mean for the industry. So Patrick, are you ready to get electrified?
Yes, I'm ready, just like Anios Jedlik was back in 1828.
1828.
1828.
So what did this fellow do?
This guy created the first electric vehicle.
So wait, Elon Musk didn't create the first electric vehicle?
No. This was a Hungarian priest turned into basically a teacher. And what else did he do? He went from electrical engineering and he taught in Hungary, and he became a professor of physics and mechanics in Budapest. This was 1828, man. He built motors, he built generators, and then he built the bloody electric car.
Well, we're talking what, like this 200 years ago?
Yeah.
And here we think that the electric car is some sort of modern marvel, and yet it's been around for 200 years.
That's right. And there's guys like 1830s. There's a Scottish guy built the first electric carriage powered by non-rechargeable batteries. So I don't think he had a vision about where that was going, right? There's a blacksmith, Thomas Davenport, built the electric locomotive. So it was kind of basically our electric transports of today, the subway systems and that.
So these are sort of like inventions or prototypes, right? These were like early kind of attempts at creating something, right?
Yeah, 1834 though, right? 1859, right? First lead acid battery, rechargeable battery was developed, right? This stuff is ancient technology. I mean, the idea was before Ford kind of flooded the market with gasoline powered engines, there was a huge amount of electric vehicles out on the road that were built by all these different inventors, right? And I guess it's whoever was survived the market kind of thing. And gasoline engine eventually. I mean, even Porsche, Ferdinand Porsche, he built himself an electric car back in 1898.
Yeah, so that was the evolution in like the late 1800s, where it said that they could carry people for the first time.
Yeah, but I mean, they had electric vehicles and they had steam-powered vehicles back then, right? There was a lot of ingenuity back then, in the early 1900s, late 1800s. It was fascinating.
Maybe we need to go back to steam-powered vehicles. Maybe that's the next evolution beyond electric vehicles.
Oh, you're full of hot air.
I can run one all by myself.
That's right. If you look at General Motors, everybody wants to talk about, who killed the electric? Remember that one show they put out, that documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car?
Yeah, there's a documentary. Yeah. I'm not sure if I ever watched it, actually, but I should go watch it after this.
Yeah. It was in 2006, but they're talking about in 1996, General Motors introduced the EV1 and then promptly killed it, right? It was really, it was ahead of its time, of course. It did the job. Now, again, they still had the battery solution or battery issues that we originally started with electric cars. The lead acid battery just, was too heavy and didn't have the full power output that we have today with lithium. But, when you really think about it, all once you start into a technology, that evolution takes hold and you build better and better and better, right? So the real issue I see back in 1996 was it was really stifling the ingenuity of the next generation. The internal combustion engine served its purpose, right? If if you compare the two, there's too many moving parts. There's too much friction. There's too much wasted energy in the internal combustion engine. It's just you compare it to a motor is simple, right? Everybody knows if it's simple, right? It's not sophisticated and it works. It's reliable. It's dependable. It does the job, right? And this is what we're comparing, right? And lo and behold, big oil, beats out on what I would consider anyway the next generation technology, right? Because
Yeah, well, it was sort of, the dominance of, players in the industry, right, that were influencing, different legislation or, kind of, or what the car makers were putting together at the time. But if you go back and look at, we talked about like the early electric vehicles. If you look at from 1930 to 1970, there was really almost nothing. Well, the primary driver there was that the gas powered vehicles were cheaper. I guess they were cheaper to make overall and cheaper for consumers. So it was really like the market that drove it, right? As far as the reason why it kind of subsided away, and then like you said, in come 1996, they tried to revive it, and but it not only did it come across as maybe more expensive at the time, but you had a lot of, like we said, lobbying against the government and lawsuits from automakers in the oil industry and pressure from the federal government, right? And so like the mandate, which was sort of forcing these companies to create electric cars, which was all based on this idea of zero emission, right? They were trying to reduce emissions from all these vehicles on the road, but ultimately it was, the same old story that we hear today, right? That it was lobbying and big money that essentially put a stop to this sort of, the legislation part of it, which was requiring companies to do it. So they had no incentive to push through spending all this money on R&D and trying to put more expensive cars on the market. They had no incentive anymore, right? When it was legislated, there was sort of an impetus to do that. And really, if you look at it, that was really what sort of killed it at that time, right? Was a number of different factors, but at the end of the day, it still came down to money, right?
oh yeah, that's what makes the world go around. And yeah, I mean, one of the things about World War II, right? Why the Hitler and his regime failed is because they ran out of oil. Um, it was funny too because they had they had dabbled in technologies, electric technologies, right? But the idea was, they didn't really engage with it. If they had, right, it's possible they wouldn't, if they built out and developed the electric motor and battery technology at that time, history would have changed, you know.
Oh yeah.
But now let's go back to where, I don't. It wasn't Tesla, you know. Everybody likes to say, "Oh, Tesla." Well, first off, Musk stole Tesla's name. The real Tesla was has nothing to do with his electric car. He was a genius, Tesla. But what I think it was when you go back into like 97, late 90s, 2000, Toyota Prius. It was really a engineering concept car that got out on the road,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was basically a hybrid. It wasn't a complete electric driveline, but it was like it was. I think it was what put electrical concepts on the map, right? From a point of view of mass commercialization and appeal, right? And then after that, Nissan jumped in, right? And everybody started dabbling a bit, right? And that after that, you know, that's when you got the other electrical, companies jumping up there, like Tesla.
What
The,
about before that? We had the smart car. Do you remember the smart car? The Little tiny
Little
smart
car,
car.
little
Looked like a
quarter car.
little go-kart on the road.
It's still
Um,
on the road. Yeah, I see them.
are they still on the road? Who was it that made those? I can't
Well,
remember right now. But
if you have a car, right? You have basically the components. You got the engine, passenger bay, and they got the trunk.
yeah,
Yeah, the smart car is really the trunk. It's just
it's just a
it's
trunk
in the
on
trunk.
wheels.
Yeah, it's trunk on wheels. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. You just reminded me. We were talking about the smart car. I remember this was like really early in my relationship when I was me and my wife were just dating, and we were going out to dinner one night, and we're driving along, and we stop at a light, and this little smart car pulls up right beside us, and the guy behind that was driving it was really like proper, like wearing kind of like a suit and tie and
Oh,
glasses, very Poindexter looking, right? And I nudged my wife with my elbow, and I said, "You should roll it," because he had his window down. I said, "You should roll down your window and tell him he looks really smart."
yeah, that would
He
go over good.
looks really smart in his
Really
smart
smart,
car. But
smart in
I
his smart
mean,
car.
those were definitely practical in terms of the size of them, and you can imagine they didn't take much electricity to get them moving. But I tell you, all it takes is one good accident, and
Yeah.
there's
Well,
not much protecting you between. There's not much between you and what's hitting you to protect you. I guess is what I was saying.
yeah, yeah. And the idea behind a lot of electric cars out there, I mean, just going back to the pioneers and stuff. I mean, the idea was the more weight you have to haul, right? The more engineering you put into the body, um, basically that's energy loss, right? So, with gasoline engines, they were building. I mean, they had so much power ratio out of gasoline that that wasn't a problem, right? But with electrical, you didn't have the high output and the high range, you know, uh, electrical batteries yet, right?
Yeah, you don't have
So
the torque, right? I mean, that's
yeah,
sort of
no,
one of those elements you need to be able to
yeah,
carry something heavy or pull something heavy, right? You got to have that sort of raw power and that torque, right?
yeah. But if you really think about it, though, I mean, the modern day, railway, engines, they're basically they're all electrical. There's diesel running power to power the electric motors, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, it's all torque there. I mean, it's right on, right at the wheel, right? It's an incredible amount of torque there. So I mean, a lot of people have been skirting around the fact that, you know, the internal combustion engine, that's the way to go, but it really isn't. Electric motor's been with us for, just as long or longer, right? It's been around longer than the internal combustion engine. So if you really think about that, what's the what is really holding us back? And so let me go back and say, if we're really looking at let's say the next 20 years, a successful adoption of EV technology to go over, let's say, 60%, right? We'll pick a normal achievable number here, um, to be able to replace all the gasoline powered the mainstream gasoline powered cars on the road and to replace them with EVs, right? In order to do that, we have to have a broad network of charging facilities, not ones that just follow, the main thoroughfares and in the big cities, right? They have to be out in the country, rural, areas. They have to have, a whole network of those, right? And that to be tied into a grid system that's reliable, right? And it can handle a larger consumption, right? So a power grid that can handle the load, right? A power grid. Now this is the next thing. We talked about this, I think in season one. Power grid that doesn't rely on coal. A power grid that actually doesn't, you know, create more carbon, right?
Well, come on, they're bringing
That
coal
if
back though,
you're
man.
if
Come
you're
on,
if
it's
you're
it's
yeah,
it's
that doesn't work.
2025, and
I'm
we're bringing
sorry.
coal back.
The math
So
doesn't work. Yeah. Yeah. If you got coal burning, power plants, your math ain't working. Okay. So,
yeah,
so a vehicle that can achieve fast charge during long trips and possess a long range. So That's what's key. The heart of an EV is its battery, and that battery we want to be able to charge it up just as fast as we can fill up, right? So you go, pull up to any gas pump, walk around your car, pay your money, stick your card in, whatever. Put the pump in and pump, right? You're pumping a good five, under 10 minutes anyway. So, and then, depending on how big the tank is, and then hang up and you're ready to go, right? Make sure you put the cap back on. Right. So you think about that exchange, right, of time, right? This is what people are used to, right? So if you can imagine that with the ability to pull up, take a supercharger, connect it to your car, right? Turn it on, and then within 5 minutes, under 10 minutes, it's fully charged and ready to go for another couple hours, 3 hours.
Yeah, well, like perhaps we'll get into it, but what about the idea that of it being self-perpetuating, the idea that it could kind of charge maybe a secondary battery while the first one's running or something, right? The idea that you wouldn't have to stop and charge up. I mean, that would be, I think, the most ideal thing. I mean, for people, although I think any incremental improvement is definitely great in terms of like superchargers and that type of thing. But we're used to, I mean, certainly not if you're going on long trips every day, but like I'll fill up my car with gas and I'll just drive around, mostly around town for like weeks and weeks and weeks without ever having to go to a gas station, or in this case, like plug it in. So I think to really get to that adoption point, I think you need something that's a little bit more maybe self-perpetuating. I guess maybe some of the more hybrid engines fall into that category, but certainly people are looking for that convenience, right?
Well, there are technologies out there that we're working on today, right? That we're going to get to that point where we can do a fast charge.
Mm-hmm.
And we can also hold a charge, right? It's the depth of the charge. It's how many watts you can get out of it, right? So when you think about that, right, that is evolution, right? That's technical evolution based on need, based on market. And that's what you only get there by having the demand in the first place, right? I mean, the first engines out there were not, the engines of today, gasoline engines with direct and, turbochargers, and you weren't getting a, 300 horsepower of a four-cylinder, it just, you just couldn't do it, right? Back then. Now we can, and you wonder how, right? Well, it's that much time and that much ingenuity to invest and to make money, right, at that. So by making a industry that's self-perpetuating, like it basically is an industry that continues to grow and evolve, and people are willing to invest in that, you will see this ongoing improvement, right? Because that's the nature of our, capitalism, democracy, and all those other fun things that we want to drive and achieve and make make money at these investments, right? So regardless, let's keep going on this whole idea of the electric vehicle, right? So we want to have that capability to refuel, only in power, right? Electricity. We also want to be able to meet or exceed today's capabilities in the gas engine, right? In performance and reliability and durability, and of course, and duration and lifetime, right? So we want to be able to say that we buy an electric car and 20 years later it's still on the road, right? And it might need a few things, a few parts might have fallen off it, but it's still a good car, it's still reliable, right? And this is what we're dealing with today, right? We've had this gasoline engine development that's occurred for all these years, and now we've got this superior. We'll call it a superior product. I would go so far as to say semi-superior.
Depends who you ask, right?
Yeah. And then we look at the electrical vehicle that's literally been starved all these years of development, and now we're starting to develop on it, right? Develop on that platform,
Well, it's
and
definitely
the
starting to
golf.
ramp up, right? And like,
Yeah,
what do people care about really when it comes down to it, right? Like, definitely there are people that, care about the environment, for example. Okay.
yeah,
But I think, for better or for worse, probably for worse, that there's a lot of people that have really like given up on this idea of, saving the environment, or that, by going, to electric cars, that we're going to, save the planet, that type of thing. I think there's an element of that, but I think it's over time because people realize there's so much more that contributes to that problem, that they just simply don't see it as like that personal responsibility. So then, like you mentioned, performance, which I thought was interesting, because I think for a lot of people, I think performance is something that does matter. Interestingly enough, a lot of people spend their time just sitting in bumper to bumper traffic where the car could just turn off. Sort of like, I have a gas powered car, but it does, if I come to a stop anywhere at a light, the whole thing just turns off. As soon as I take my foot off the brake to go hit the gas, the car turns on again. So I'm not, wasting gas just like sitting there, especially if you're in real like backlog traffic. But I think performance is sort of a big one for sure. These electric vehicles have like sort of this sort of instant torque, as it were, right? It just sort of, you hit the gas pedal and it just kind of goes, right? It goes from 0 to 1, whereas like a gas engine has this sort of like buildup of energy or power that you simply don't have in those vehicles, I think, right? That's one of the things that I personally enjoy about the gas engine, is that sort of feeling of like power, right? Not that these electric cars aren't power, but it's sort of a different type of power, right? It's more of like an instant power as opposed to like, flying a rocket ship, or what have you, right? But, and then is it just those things though, right? Is part of it, aesthetics, right? We're very drawn to like sports cars and high-end cars, which are definitely have an aesthetic appeal. What's interesting is that there's no reason why you couldn't, I shouldn't say there's no reason, but maybe there's few reasons why you couldn't build an economy car that looked like a Porsche, right? If you wanted to like mold it in that way. Maybe it wouldn't have quite the aerodynamics or what have you, right? But but they don't. Why? Because they want to make, if something looks very modern and sleek, like a Porsche, for example, right, or a Lamborghini, you want to associate that with the expensive car, right? The aesthetics associated with wealth. The reason why I'm bringing that up is that, why is it that all of these newer electric cars, whether you're looking at like a Tesla, or just looked at like the truck that Amazon's making, or this Project Aero in Canada, these electric cars very much lean into this kind of like futuristic spaceship type vibe, right?
yeah.
Um, they're
Why is
trying to
that?
create some
Why
sort
do
of,
they do that? Because they actually pay attention to efficiency, right?
ah,
That's why you know, the drag coefficient on cars. Um, I mean, really, take the standard, I don't know, Chevy pickup or something, Ford pickup, put it in a tunnel and see what kind of numbers you get out. It's pathetic, right? These great big grills on them and everything. They're not. You don't want that in a this is where we get into the challenge of efficiency and building in that from an engineering perspective, right? And in order to improve your overall duration, right? Um, but they are making the vehicles lighter. I mean, they're utilizing aluminum, throughout the vehicle and that kind of thing, and plastic, and it's. I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying they're managing to squeeze out weight, but the aerodynamics on a lot of vehicles today still are way behind what they should be. And when you see the modern electric cars, that's what they have to be, right? They have to have those efficiencies because they want to get the range, right? That's the big that's the big seller, right? People want to have the range. They want to be able to not worry about not having a place to jack in. They want to be able to drive where they want to drive, get the range out of it, and get home, and then finally plug in, and we're good to go, right?
yeah, I think
So,
there's something subliminal though about them making the cars look very sort of futuristic, because then it feels like you're
oh
buying
yeah,
into something that's sort of ahead of its time. It's almost subliminal or something like that, right? But then explain to me how this like ugly monstrosity that is the Cybertruck came to be. That's the part that I don't get. because
It's
maybe
still
there's some.
aerodynamic if you look
No,
at it.
maybe there is, like, I mean, certainly you look
Yeah,
at it, there's like a sloped kind of windshield in that too,
yeah,
right?
oh
But I
yeah,
mean, I've seen these things drive around the streets. I saw a number of them in Toronto the other week, and I mean, like, this thing is hulking. I mean, it hogs the road like it's nobody's business, right?
yeah, yeah,
And like, while it might look very futuristic and appeal to some people, I just look at it as this sort of like unnecessary monstrosity on the road. That, like, why does it? I realize it's a truck, but it seems to almost be trying to make a statement, right? And
yeah,
maybe this is getting away from the technology conversation this week, but we are just talking about electric vehicles in general. It almost feels like trying to make a statement on the road. Is that really what we need, right? I couldn't even imagine how difficult it must be to navigate one of these monstrosities through the tight streets of a city and busy streets of a city like Toronto, right? It's just unbelievable. I don't see how it's like a practical design. I think you could build a Cybertruck that's got a little bit smaller profile, a little bit sleeker, right? And that can have some level of practicality to it. I mean, this thing is like a bloody Hummer, right? You
yeah,
remember the Hummers when they came out?
yeah,
Just this sort of, but that was the thing with the Hummer, right? They were trying to make this like bold visual statement on the road. So it's almost has as much to do with branding as it does technology, maybe, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, if you look at other companies like Rivian and stuff, I mean, they're for the upper end, right? So the idea is that they appeal. This whole market was originally appealing to the higher end market, the people who have money. They wanted to have something unique, right? And so that's where they invested so much money in design and appearance, right? But nowadays, if you look at the modern slate truck, it's coming out at 20,000 bucks, right? It's basically econo truck, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what they're selling. They're selling it to everybody, right? So I mean, the Model S and all that for Tesla, I mean, they started downsizing the cost and got out of that market and started looking into the everyman market, I'll call it, right? Um, Now the everyman market, there's, you know, they're looking at the dollar bill, right? That you got to get it value for your dollar, right? And it's all about working those dollars to make economic sense. And the math changes, right? It's not about appeal and style and the setting a trend and all these other appealing for this rich market now. It's no, it's about practicality, right? It's about delivery. It's about power, right? It's about range, right? It's about value for the dollar. That's where the electrical market is really going to win in the future, I think, right? But there's a few big things that if we're looking at the overall success matrix, I'll call it, there's a few things that are still in the way of that, right? The uh, the idea of I talked about the idea of having power, you know, stations throughout, rural countryside, right? But also the grid, right? And this is where the biggest problem lies today, I think. The idea is that we do not have and have not completed or achieved, um, fusion production, right? Power
Yeah.
production to a point where it's commercially feasible yet, right? We're getting very close, right? And the small nuclear reactors that we're talking about today are still extremely expensive, right? Those everybody can say that sure you can they're cheaper than compared to these big power plants that we built in the past, but again they're scalable and there's less risk and blah blah blah, but they're still quite expensive, right? So the fission, small fission reactors are still quite expensive. So it really it's all about power production, right? And
Well,
that's
yeah,
what
and
we
the
have to
distribution, right?
yeah. So we have to invest as a country into power, right?
I think that's the
We
challenge, though, right?
every
Like, it's there's where the complexity lies, right? The thing is that you have to have that public-private sort of partnership, right? That the makers of the electric vehicles are private companies, right? And they can create the technology in the cars. They could even create the charging technology, for example, right? But the electrical grid is really under the government when you look at it, right? Whether it's municipal or federal or what have you, right? That are going to supply the power needs, but then build out the infrastructure to allow for that charging as well, right? Because you're traveling somewhere, you have to park somewhere and charge it. Is that at a charging facility? Is it at a traditional gas station or what have you, right? And there's where you have to have like the political will to build out the infrastructure that essentially is going to replace you know gas driven cars. And there's a lot of people that still don't want that to happen, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of those people have, what's that? A lot of money. And what does a lot of money buy you? A lot of lobbyists and a lot of influence in government, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's where it's interesting, because while that's what's needed, is there the political will? You sort of have this dichotomy in the US of, you have this, our good friendly billionaire buddy there, Elon, that we always keep talking about, right? Who's, best friends with the president. And yet what's happening? They're rolling back all of the incentives and laws around electric vehicles, and like they're rolling everything back that was instituted before, or I don't know about everything, but the majority of that is going away now, right? And they're firing up the coal plants, and they're going back to a lot of the old ways, while part of the country is trying to move forward in a sense, right? And I think that's where you have to have that will for them to do it, not just for like the family that wants to go on vacation, but you think about the number of transport trucks, right, that are on the road transporting goods everywhere, or different types of trucks and what have you. They're all burning gas as well. There's really no need for it if we had the charging infrastructure in place. And to Elon's credit, he's trying to build this electric transport truck, and he's also been trying to work with the government to get these charging corridors built through different areas within the states, to get goods from one state to the other and so on, right? But there hasn't been a lot of investment in those areas over the years, so they're just trying to like sort of play catch up, as it were, right? But when you look at the even the bigger picture, I mean, we're talking primarily about electric vehicles today, but you can even extend that out to other forms of transportation, and airplanes and trains and everything else, which we won't have time to get into today. But it's back to that old like political will, and also economics, right? When you look at when gas started to become like obscenely expensive, although we're kind of used to a fairly high gas price, it's come down in fairly recent times. But that sort of piqued interest of a lot of people to go out and start buying electric vehicles when the price of gas started going up and up and up, right? You used to pay less than $1. Now it's like, I don't know what it is today, but it's gotten up to like, 160, 170, 180. But then you notice like the gas prices have come down over time, because the people selling the gas, if they make it too expensive, they're going to drive more adoption of electric vehicles. So now you're seeing the gas prices come down and down, which for some people, then they're not as incentivized to go out and seek out those electric vehicles. So I think at the end of the day, it's really like economics is really what drives all of this at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. Well, there's if you think about the idea of implementing a new technology across a whole country, right? There's going to be private industry and government working as a partnership to make this kind of thing happen, right? And the government side of things is I mean, they usually operate on a net loss, right? It's long-term investment for the good of the country and the good of the people, right? Whereas, if you look at private, it's about return quarterly, right? There's a little forgiveness for long-term investment, which to me is pretty sad, because there used to be that, right? What we need today, right, are those investments, large investments, and continual investments into power production. And I don't mean by burning fossil fuels, and I don't mean by burning coal, and natural gas or anything like that, right? I'm talking about looking at the true aspect of building out nuclear power sources. And despite the public's hate of nuclear power, behind the closet, right? We are running, 70% of our profiles coming out of nuclear fission plants right now, right? We don't only have so many, hydro dams and facilities that are available to us, to generate that form of electricity. When we're starting into such high consumption and such high, production requirements, we do have to go back into nuclear industry. We do have to, build out the next generation of safer, more powerful, more durable, I'll say there's fission out there. There's molten salt reactors that you can build today. Bottom line, they will be able to, if they have a severe issue, they basically shut themselves down, by design, right? So if you think about, do we have the capability of building something safer, not built in, 1950s technology? Yes, we do, right? Because
Yeah.
a lot of the breeder reactors that are running today, they originated in the 50s and 60s. That's how old that technology is, right? Those original ideas. Again, big money invested in stifling, extra conservatism, not trying to evolve the technology. We need to evolve the technology, and the same thing we have to do. I mean, China's pushing the limit here, right? They got this. Their tokamak just set a world record in January. It ran for get this 18 minutes. Okay, you think, oh wow, the idea of a power plant is you run it 24 hours, 7 days a week, kind of thing, right? And they ran it for 18 minutes successfully, right? Well, I mean, the previous record was like 403 seconds. So
That's a huge jump for sure.
that's a big
Yeah.
jump. And I firmly believe we're within a decade away from having what we call, extra cheap power, right?
Well, we better
And
have a lot of it, right?
once we're there, right, you won't be paying that much for, you're not going to go and pay $2 a liter for gas, because your EV is going to be sitting there and you can basically fill it up, right? Charge it for, $3, right? It's just not going to happen, right? People are going to move from the hydrocarbon to electrical, because bottom line, we have achieved, free power for everybody, right?
Well, that's the economics of it, right?
That's
So I'll
right.
throw a little wrinkle in your plan there. What about this astronomical need that AI has for electric power, right? Are we gonna, if we don't solve that, that's where all the power is gonna go.
It's going to suck. It's going to suck all the fusion generators dry, and we'll be sitting there, with only one light per household.
No, we'll be back to gas, man. It's gonna be like Mad Max. We're gonna be fighting in the desert
Yeah.
over gasoline because the machines will have taken all the electric power that gets generated.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So that's where it's going.
Well, we're just one more thing about that is that right now we're seeing a whole slew of new companies that are coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, that are in not only in fusion production, like they're looking at building fusion, plants, but also, small scale fusion production, and same thing, small scale fission, right? So I think this is very promising, and this is where we need to go, right? We need to go there, because you cannot set everybody needs to be on EVs in 2030 without having, we're going to have a power grid that can support it, right? Because bottom line, I think we can only get into, I asked AI to do the math here, and I think came back and said that 30% of the vehicles we can replace right now with EVs, and that's it, right? Because basically your power grid doesn't support it. And if your power grid is burning coal, I'm sorry, you missed the point.
we're
you
kind of
know?
defeating the purpose there.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
we had the if we have the power thing sort of solved more or less, right? We still need that technology and the batteries, right? We
yes,
still need them to, hold a lot of charge for long distance. We need them to have the ability to charge more quickly. So like where we had it with the battery technology is really the heart of it at the end of the day, right?
yeah.
The ability to plug in is one thing, but if the battery technology is not efficient and powerful and long lasting, then people still are not going to be adopting it, right?
Yeah. So where we're going with that, of course, is the lithium battery is great right now, and they're doing something called silicone anode, uh, combination with that, and that's raising the efficiencies even further. But lithium is hard to get hold of, and it's expensive to mine, and there's not that much out there, kind of thing, right? So until we go out and start mining asteroids, we're going to have that as a problem, right? Um,
Yeah.
So we got that. Solid state batteries. That to me, that's like they can achieve some pretty amazing things using solid state batteries, but it's a collection of very expensive technologies, right? It's like using I don't know, a really high powered computer, to do basic math, right? It's it's very expensive. Um, to get there with the solid state batteries, even though they're able to achieve, extremely fast charging and, considerable, power storage. But um, there's something called graphene, right? Something like graphite. It's a derivative of graphite, right? Um, but it's really expensive to. It's like a very exotic material, right? Um, and it has amazing properties, but it's very expensive to make, right, from graphite. Um, and they can make graphene batteries, and you can get, you can go up to like 500 miles on a charge and things like that. It's incredible what you can do. But again, we're going back to, is how popular slash how easy is graphite to get hold of, right? And that one is a lot more easy than compared to lithium, right? But so we have that as a possibility that needs to evolve, right? Because we have to figure out how to manufacture that in large scale, right? Um, the next one that's to me really promising is the sodium ion, which are salt batteries, right? And they basically, me, I like simplicity, right? Simplicity makes the world go round, right? And sodium ion batteries are it. I think they're the ones that are going to get us to the point where you're going to be able to achieve a fast charge and have this, incredible storage, right? Capability, right? But we just got to put in, we got to put in the time, got to put in the research, and we
So what
got
is
to,
it about that one in particular, like the sodium ion? And what is it about the salt, as it were, right? Like why
yeah.
is that technology the most promising?
Well, because it came out of the corner from nowhere, and nobody thought you could do it, and
Hmm.
now it's basically on par with lithium, right? And you turn around and you say, well, how can that be, right? Like I said, it's all about simplicity, right? Um, those are the if you throw complexity at a problem, you end up with a lot of failure points, right? So this is why I like the salt. I like the graphene too. But like I said, those two technologies require, um, the first problem I see when you're looking at batteries is raw materials. If the raw material solution is, there's only a limited supply, very expensive to mine, very expensive to refine, blah, 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 blah. It's a bad solution, right? You have
Yeah.
to have raw material equation that we can turn that raw material into batteries, and we can do it with relative ease without a lot of expenditure of cost. And the act of farming or harvesting this material, in some cases mining, right, is not extremely exorbitantly expensive, right, because it's available, right? It's popular, it's common, right? So that to me, this is where I think Yeah, you can have trace elements in those batteries, right? Of certain types of exotic chemicals and stuff like that, exotic minerals. Yeah, you can get away with that, right? And I know I'm introducing a bit of complexity there, but it's just like our catalytic converters and things like that, right? Um, the idea is that, if you're putting trace amounts in, right, it's manageable, right? And then we get into a situation where you stop in at a charging station, you plug in under 10 minutes, you're fully,
Hmm.
you got a full charge. You're fueled up, right? And you're ready to go. And you're ready to go for not 20 minutes. You're ready to go for 3 hours, right?
Yeah, what happens to these batteries over time? We're talking about like the range, which is important, obviously, and the amount of time it takes to charge. But, obviously, one of the things that we've all experienced, right, with our, our phones and different things running these sort of, lithium ion batteries, you can charge them up, but over time, they don't retain the charge as long. Your phone seems to like sort of die more quickly, for example, right? And then what I've experienced with some of these devices is that they kind of get to the point after quite a few years where, the battery itself is kind of worn out, as it were, right? Unfortunately, with some of these phones, that means that now your phone is done and now you're putting the whole thing in the in the dumpster type thing, right?
Yeah.
But what about, these batteries? Are there any of them that seem to have more longevity, perhaps? Because I think that's a huge thing as far as how often are people going to have to like throw them out and replace them? Are there elements that can be recycled? Or, that sort of seems to be, and maybe it's a red herring, right? But for people that argue against these things, they would say, well, we're going to start filling our landfills with all these batteries from electric cars. Well, we're already filling them with tons of electronics. I don't know why this is such a a sticking
Yeah.
point for
Yeah.
people, because but it's but at the same time, I think it's an important consideration, right, that we're
Yeah.
not having to replace these batteries once every 3 to 5 years type thing, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at graphene and stuff, you just break it down and reconstitute it, right? Graphite. But okay, so let's talk about lithium, right? So there's this when you look at your phone, right? Your phone is a very condensed, miniature device, right? I'll say the the battery on that is engineered for not only for charge and duration, but it's also within that very confined space, right? There's limited capability engineering wise that you can do to protect that battery, right? So there's a high degree of degradation. If you look at battery packs that are on these EVs of today, right? They're originally, I mean, by law, they were U.S. law and Canadian law. I think they had to last 8 years, right? But what they're finding is the maximum after 8 years now, and we've already went past that in lifetime of some of these automobiles. We're looking at less than 20% degradation in the batteries. And you go, well, why is that? Well, because you have temperature control systems and charging control systems, and you have
Hmm.
space, right? Physical space in between these they're not as densely packed, right? So the batteries in an EV, right, are built to last longer, right? And they're built to uh, they have very extensive charging and control systems on to ensure that you maximize the cycles, right, on those batteries. So if you think about that compared to your phone, I mean, it's not a similar device at all, right? And even
Oh,
though
true. Yeah.
it's our natural tendency to say, well, are my phone's dead in 3 years, so will my EV. But that's not the case, right? What they're finding today is that they're going well beyond. They're going into 12, 15 years, without having to consider replacing the backpack or the battery pack. So that's pretty impressive, right? And that's
Yeah, yeah.
old technology. Those are old batteries. That's not modern batteries, right? The battery we're producing today, right, has a possibility of lasting even longer with less, degradation, right? So we have all that engineering behind us, right? Like I said, if we had spent the same amount of time that we had with the gasoline engine on, electrical cars and the battery systems of electrical cars, we'd have a battery that would weigh, 100 pounds on a trunk of a car, and it would allow us to run, 300 kilometers an hour for, 10 hours straight, right? But we're not there yet. You know, we we're way too far back in history right now. We've lost too much time. We got to go gain the time back,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's interesting because it's, we touched on earlier sort of the economic side of things, which is certainly a major driver, right? But it's, it's also the idea that, this resource that is sitting here in such abundance, right? Where we can create gasoline for cars and whatnot. It's not necessarily infinite, right? There might be a huge abundance of it, and maybe there will be for a long time, but certainly somewhere down the line, we're going to reach a point where there's going to be some level of scarcity, right? And where some of those resources are going to have to be focused more on, airplanes and other large entities to move around. It's going to force, the idea of moving to, more renewable sources of energy, as it were, right? But also like sort of the reliance on these resources creates a dynamic in sort of the global economy, right? So when you look at how much countries are reliant upon other countries, when you look at some of the richest people in the world, or like the Saudis and other entities, right, where they control the countries where a lot of these resources come from, right? And then so that creates a reliance from other countries on those countries. So now when you start looking at the idea of renewable energy and electric cars, now you're changing that dynamic of money and power in the world. I think some of these guys have enough money to last them 10 lifetimes or 50 lifetimes, right? But I'm just saying, like, it's more than just like the technology and the environment and things. There's sort of a global dynamic at play around like supply chains and how these elements are processed and refined and transported to other countries that need it, that don't have those resources themselves. And if something like electric vehicles or what have you are going to help a country be more energy independent, which I think is what some of these smaller countries are looking for, right? They're
yeah,
looking for this kind of like energy independence, and by virtue of that, then they can maybe create their own element of wealth there that's not fully dependent on this idea of trade. And in this new age of tariffs and everything else happening, right, it's sort of, I think it's becoming more and more important, right, that we become a little bit more self-sufficient. And there's technology like this that can help us get there. And there's certainly a whole bunch of different pros and cons, just as there is on the other side of the fence. But there's a huge amount of promise there in terms of how transformational it can be, not just from like the car that we drive every day, but like I said, to like trains transporting people, transport trucks transporting goods. There's, this whole world is based on movement, right? It's
yeah.
movement of
It
people,
is.
movement of goods.
Yeah,
It's really like, when you think about it, that's, it's almost cliche, right? But it's like,
yeah.
what makes the world
How many
go
how
around?
many
Well,
how many planes were, like, when they talked about, was it during COVID that they took, how many planes were in the air simultaneously? It was like, I don't know, 9,000, 10,000 planes, commercial planes in the air at any given moment in time or something.
yeah, and all of a sudden during COVID, all the travel stopped, and then all of a sudden it was, the skies were quiet.
Yeah.
What was interesting is not
You could
just
see
the
the
skies,
stars.
but
Yeah.
like people commuting. I remember listening to somebody talk on a podcast, and they remembered that during the pandemic, when everybody was at home, and then very quickly a lot of people were working from home, and you didn't have like the streets and the highways in California that were traditionally some of the most clogged, most congested streets in the world were now empty. People actually commented that the air seemed cleaner when they went outside.
Because it
Well,
was. It
it
was.
was, right? But I'm just
But
saying,
but
like,
but
that's an enormous impact,
take
right?
that as a huge plus for EVs, right? This is what you get if people are driving EVs, like at 50%, let's say, or 60%.
Yeah.
You would walk out and the air would smell cleaner. It's that simple. Like if you drive for 20 minutes in a car, you used up, and this is like a, a fuel efficient four-cylinder, you would use up the same amount of air in 20 minutes in a car that the typical adult would utilize, who would throughout the whole day, right? And working, right? Like heavy labor, right? So you think about that. I mean, we're burning up our oxygen, we're replacing it with crap, right? And that crap we're breathing in. Where the goldfish in that tiny little pot, that funny little glass jar, where that little goldfish, and we're just, crapping that tank and saying, "Oh, it smells great," right? No, it doesn't, right? No, this isn't. This is where hydrocarbon systems like that are out of balance. We're beyond 400 ppm in the atmosphere. We don't worry about carbon in the atmosphere anymore, right? CO2 in the atmosphere isn't a worry. It's methane now, right? We've already started the methane. It's too late. Okay.
Yeah.
Like you think about it. So, whatever we do today, right, it's not going to make a difference from a point of view of making any positive difference, because you've already started the next cycle of dominoes, right? Now, that all being said, right, if the sun decides it's going to cool off for 10 years, right, we can have another ice age, right? There's other powers at play, right, other than us.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the whole idea of like the cyclical, idea of the ice age, and people talk a lot about climate change being cyclical in that way, and that's all fine because I mean, oftentimes when I think about this, I don't even think so much about climate change because I think that's something pretty huge that probably has a lot of factors. But something as simple as what we just talked about, not just does the air smell cleaner without all these vehicles on the road, or let's just say if you replaced all the vehicles in California with electric vehicles, the air would be a little bit cleaner because you weren't constantly pumping some type of harmful chemical, right? And the idea of, kind of saving the environment or saving the planet to me is different than just keeping the environment clean. And I think that's should really be like a huge argument across the board for it as well, is that, trying to keep the environment clean, if not for yourself, for your children, for your grandchildren, thinking about this, and not just in terms of like, electric cars, but everything that we kind of do to pollute our environment. But, it's kind of funny that we have this like solution right in front of us, and yet there's still a lot of pushback on it, right?
What bottom line is, everything, it depends on, us moving forward, not backwards. We got to move forward. Stop looking back and saying it was better back then. Bullshit, right? Wake the hell up, right? No, what we have to be doing is we have to be engaging in nuclear power, and we have to be able to engage in micro nuclear power, right? We have to really forge ahead on the fusion side, because that's where we get. Well, that's where the golden, a goal of no cost power is really there. That's when we're going to be able to get there, and we got to continue with. And I firmly believe we've got to continue with solar. We've got to continue with wind power and ocean power and what have you, because that breeds to be an invention, right? So we start thinking about the power grid now. They start, there's companies out there that are looking at having smaller grids, subgrids. And on the subgrids, you're going to have big commercial battery systems, right? So all these peak production systems like wind and solar are going to generate into these big commercial battery systems, and then from there, those they're going to be used to basically produce power on where production is, when production is low, right? They're going to be supplementing that power. And those types of projects, to me, are incredibly important, because it is all about, if you really build something well, you build it in redundant, cells, right? And that's how you get, true, fail-safe, right? You're not dependent on the whole system, as long as the one system's working, your local system, right? And this is where I like when they talk about these micro fusion for municipality, power grids and that kind of thing. That I believe in that kind of thing. I think that's the right thing to do, and that will get us to the point where we have enough power. We have enough power, then we engage in the EV side of things, right? And we abandon, putting shit in the air, right? And we walk outside and we can smell, the flowers and the trees, and we can look out and we can see a clear sky, right? And this is what we need to do. There's no way around it. And the boomers that love chemicals, and I'm not one of them. I don't love oil, and I don't love chemicals. And I don't love what we've done to this planet, and we need to change.
It sounds like what we need is a electric revolution, Patrick.
Yes, that's what we need.
Wheels of lightning, silent scream, charged with power, a neon dream. Storm through shadows, no fumes behind. Fuel of the future, unchained mind. Leave the smoke, the darkest skies. Electric force that never dies. Smart and swift, the engine hums. Sustainable power, the future drums. Wheels of lightning, silent scream, charged with power, a neon dream. Storm through shadows, no fumes behind. Fuel of the future, unchained mind. Leave the smoke, the darkened skies. Electric force that never dies. Smart and swift, the engine hums. Sustainable power, the future drums. Steel and sparks, a fusion blend. Long range thunder, journey no end. Energy pure, born of the sun. Today we rise, the new age begun. Silent predator, rolling homes. AI whispers, the circuits and bones. Fast as fire, sharp as steel. Visions of blood, this force is real. Lead by gas, the chains of old. Freedom flows, a story bold. No oil stain, no choking breath. Drive to life, away from death. Goodbye gas, the chains of old. Freedom flows, a story bold. No oil stain, no choking breath. Drive to life, away from death.
Oh,
Goodbye gas, the chains of old. Freedom flows, a story old. No oil stain, no choking breath. Drive to life, away from death.
is it done yet? What is it with these AI tunes, man?
I don't
they
know.
don't
I always
want
think
to
they're done, and then they just come back for more.
Yeah.
It's like encore, encore. Goodbye, gas, the chains of old. Freedom
Nice.
flows, a story bold. No oil stain, no choking breath. Drive to life, away from death.
Nice. That's what we need.
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more musings from the generator and the discriminator.